Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Happy New Year. I apologize. I'm a little late this evening. Just setting everything up. I hope you guys can hear me. So I'm just going to wait a few minutes for people to hop on here. And if somebody can just check in and make sure that the sound is good, that would be awesome. I am still trying to figure out technology every now and then when it comes to these lives. I'll be honest, I think it's probably the most stressful part of these. So we'll just get started in a second here. But I hope you guys are having a great start to 2022. Last week we talked a bit about vision and dreaming and setting up a vision board. So I don't know if any of you guys had a chance to create a vision board for yourselves, but I did that over New Year's Eve with some friends, and it was great. I just gotta put it on my wall and ready to go. So today I want to talk a bit about the cash flow quadrant. So for those of you who don't know what that is, it is a book. There's a book by that name. It's called The Cash Flow Quadrant by Robert Kiyosaki, who also wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad and The Business of the 21st Century. Amazing books. If you're looking for new reads for 2022, I definitely recommend reading those. If you're looking to get into business, it's a great starting point. It will definitely challenge your old beliefs and get you thinking. And they've definitely had a huge impact on sort of my growth in the past year. And that's part of the reason why I'm here today. I want to share the knowledge that I've learned and, what I've been doing. Hello, Candice. I'm not too sure if you can hear me, so I hope you can. But I'm about to get started here on the cash flow quadrant and we're going to get into it. So I've decided to break this up in two parts, just because there's a lot of information in the book. So okay, awesome, perfect. Thank you, Candace. And yeah, so it's going to be two-part series. There's going to be a lot of information that's in the book that I'm not necessarily going to go over just because there's a lot in there. So if you're looking to get more information, definitely read the book or reach out, and I'd be happy to discuss that with you. But the way that I've structured it for today is that I want to talk a bit about what is the cash flow quadrant. I want to go over the four different categories of how people make their income. And I'm going to focus a bit more on the left side of the quadrant, which is the employee side and the self-employed side. And then next week, what I plan to do is to talk a bit more about the right side of the quadrant, so the other half of it. And I want to build a bridge for you guys to explain how network marketing falls into the cash flow quadrant and how financial education can have a huge impact in terms of where you invest your time and sort of where your money can grow for you. So let's get started. Beautiful whiteboard for you guys. So we're going to break this down. So just so you know, there are four different categories that, basically determine where your income is coming from. There are four types of people who make up the business world. And just so you know, all four of these categories you can be successful in. Typically, you can only be wealthy on the right side of the quadrant, which I'm going to explain in just a second. But there are pros and cons to each quadrant. They're very different and they attract very different personality types. And there are different people that gravitate towards different quadrants. So we're going to break that down a bit today. And then next week, I'm going to go into a bit more specifics with regards to what's on the right side of the quadrant. So here we have employee. Okay, so this is the employee quadrant where most people fall under. I myself, as a government employee and HR advisor, I am an employee. So anybody who has a boss typically would fall under this category. Below that, we have the self-employed. So over here, you have a job. Over here, you own a job. So this is where you basically told yourself, I'm tired of having a boss. I want to call the shots. I want to make my own decisions. So you start your own business. Typically, it's smaller traditional businesses that end up in this category. Down this side, big business owners. Okay, so Fortune 500 companies usually fall in this category. The criteria for being a business owner, usually you need to have a minimum of 500 employees in your organization. Typically, it takes about $25 million to get started. So anything that you're looking at, McDonald's, Subway, any kind of franchises, Amazon, these are big businesses. And then under here, we have the investors category. So this is where you make your money work harder for you. So here you have a job, here you own a job, here you're working where you're leveraging people and systems, and here you're making your money work harder for you. Okay, so we're going to save these mostly for next week. This follows under the passive income side of things. So if you guys have been following this series, I talked about the difference between earned income and passive income a couple of weeks ago. So we're going to be talking about that. And the reason that I chose to do the cash flow quadrant today is because I wanted to build up towards it. So we talked a bit about vision, we talked about passive income, we talked about building habits, and this all sort of builds upon where we are now with the cash flow quadrant. So employees, like I said, people like myself, government employees, anybody who has a boss falls under this category. Self-employed, it could be doctors, who decide to start their own private practice. It could be restaurant owners. It could be consultants. It could be coaches. So anybody who decides to go back and sort of start something on their own. So they become the system. Over here, again, McDonald's, Amazon, any big Fortune 500 companies. Investors, examples of that would be investing in real estate, investing in the stock market, crypto. So anything where your money is making money for you. So that just gives you an example of what the four different categories are where people are making their income from. So the way that we divide it, and you'll see I have an L here on the right, I have a poor and a wealthy. And I'm by no means here to, criticize one quadrant over another. Like I mentioned to you guys, you can be successful in any of these. They each have their own strengths, their own weaknesses. There's risk in all of them. So you really want to choose where, you're focusing your time and your energy and your development. And oftentimes when it comes to shifting quadrants, it is very difficult because what happens is that you need to shift your entire core belief. So Robert Kiyosaki says it's almost like going and changing your religion or changing your political party, or, it's like massive transformation internally because you need to change sort of what you've learned since you were young, right? When we go to school, a lot of times what happens is that we go through a system that develops us to become the working class. So when we go to school, we get trained to be on the left side of the quadrant. They teach us how to become great employees. If you look at it, like we receive zero financial education when we go through school, right? People who developed that are people who, one, had family members who were business owners, had an education when it came to financial education, or who had mentors, or who had an interest that developed later on. But the reality is that you don't necessarily develop um, the skill set of how to build a business when you go to school. You're trained to become an employee, and that's pretty much it, right? So what is the difference between the two sides here? I have some notes here just because there's a lot of information. I want to make sure that I get, the good stuff across to you guys. So over here, as I've mentioned before, what happens is that you're often trading your time for money. Okay, so here you have 24 hours in a day, and that's basically consuming your efforts are being rewarded based on the amount of income that you're making. So you're either trading your time or you're trading your expertise. So if you're a doctor, you're a lawyer, there's a certain skill set that you have that is bringing you a massive amount of income. And the reality is that you can make a lot of money being self-employed. People who have small businesses do end up making a lot of money, even though they're in the poor category. Why is that? Because wealth on the right side is defined by the amount of time that you have. When you're a small business owner, you have zero amount of time because your business consumes you. That takes up all of your time, really. So, you know, over here, how Robert Kiyosaki explains it is that you're basing your actions on security. That's what you're seeking. You have a fear of losing your job. So what happens is that employees fear losing their jobs, and how they deal with that is that they go to an employer where they can secure a job, right? The self-employed, they want control. They have a fear of losing their job, so they want control. So they do that by creating their own business. They think that, okay, I'm going to be my own system. That way I can control, what happens, what goes on, and that way I call the shots. So fear of, losing your job, and it's security based. If you look on the right side of the quadrant, what happens is that people fear getting a job. Because what does getting a job mean? It means that you no longer have time, and wealth is defined by time. So the people who are over here, they're looking at ways that they don't have to get a job, that they can put people or a system to work for them. Yeah, they're going to work really hard for a certain period of time, but the goal is that eventually the people or the systems are going to generate the income for them, so they don't have to do the work. They don't have to do the legwork all the time. So that's the main difference between the two. So there are certain limitations, when it comes to the left side and then versus the right side. And one of the reasons why, it's pretty hard to get rich, I guess, on the left side of the quadrant, is that as an employee, you're getting taxed at the highest level. So even though you're generating a huge or six-figure income, chances are that a good chunk of that money is actually going towards the government, towards taxes, right? We've talked about this when I was talking about earned income versus passive income. Self-employed, same thing, right? There's a lot of costs involved when you start a business. There's a huge amount that you have to pay in terms of like the overhead. You have employees, you have workers' comp, you have, rental space. There's a whole bunch of factors to consider. So when people are like, yeah, my business made this much amount, it's like, okay, great. But how much did you have to put in initially before you made that revenue, before you made your return on your investment? Because when you start off, you got to put a lot of money in. We talked about this a few weeks ago too, where, if you start a coffee shop across the street, you're not going to be necessarily making the money that you put in until maybe 3, 4, 5 years into it. And a lot of times what happens is that small businesses don't even make it past the 5 year mark because they can't make the money that they've put into that. So that's one of the reasons why it falls on the left side, is that you are the system. You are putting your time in order to make money. Okay? So over here, I put freedom, dream, and vision. We talked a bit about this last week, the power of a vision. A vision is what pulls you to do certain things, is to do the things that you don't want to do, right? So when you're on this side, what happens is that you're working for somebody else's dream. You're working for somebody else's vision. And you lose sight of what it is that you're working towards. You're so used to being told what to do. That's what an employee does, right? You have a boss that tells you what you need to do and you get that done. Self-employed is the same thing, right? It's hard for you to sort of stay and see a bigger picture because you're so focused on the mechanics. Whereas over here, you have possibilities. You're forced to think outside the box. You have to look at options. You have to find a way to get things done more efficiently so that you can win your time back, that you can make passive income. So that's where possibilities come. That's where vision comes. A lot of the dreamers, a lot of the entrepreneurs, they end up being on this side. Why? Because they're building, they're thinking outside the box, they're doing things against the grain. That's what's creating sort of their wealth, and that's how they're building. So I want to talk about these two categories a little bit more. Um, Employees, like I said, I'm very familiar with this category because I'm part of this category, and I have been for the last 35 years, 36 years now. And I say that because I grew up in a family of employees. So that's what I was raised to believe in. Like that's all I knew. I didn't know anybody who was a small business owner, or a big business owner, or investors. This was all I was exposed to. So this was the education that I got in the household, and it's also what I learned in the school system, right? So this is where I'm most familiar with. And like I said, when you're in this category, you don't have a vision. Suddenly, I don't know about you guys, but I went to university and I came out of there with big dreams. I was like, I'm going to change the education system. There's so many things that I want to do. And then I got a job and I was really motivated. I was like, all these changes are going to happen. But the reality was that the job that I got was very specific, and I got trained to do that job in a specific way. And when you're working for someone else, you got to do it that way. You have a boss that tells you, I need to get this done. I need it done by tomorrow. And you do it. And eventually, what happens is that you go to school, you get that degree, you get that job. Then suddenly you have the family, you have the house, you have the baby, and now you have all these expenses. And you rely on that job more than that job relies on you because you have expenses to pay. So you are sitting here and you do what needs to get done. You show up. You show up, you work your 9 to 5, and you do it. You do what you're told. And you lose sight of that vision. You got these blinders on because you're following someone else's vision. You've forgotten how to dream because you're so focused on the mechanics. You're like, okay, I just got to do my time. I got to do the time that I need to do, and I'll get paid. I'll get paid every 2 weeks if I do that. And that's how people lose vision. Um, this is where most people fall. Most people are employees. I actually Googled last night because, Robert Kiyosaki's book is quite dated. It's still very good though, because he makes a lot of references to 2020 and the changes that he anticipates, and a lot of them you can see now, and it's kind of mind blowing. But I Googled, what is the average Canadian salary? And it came up that it was less than 55,000 a year. And it kind of blew my mind. I was like, really? Like that doesn't seem like a lot given inflation and you know, it's when you think about that's money after taxes too. Like people are not pocketing 55,000 a year. They're being taxed at this group here, they're getting taxed the most. So when people say, oh, the rich keep getting richer, is because there are certain tax benefits when you're on this side of the quadrant versus this side. So, how are people surviving on less than 55,000 a year? Like that was mind blowing for me. When you're over here, you're working till you're 65. So you're putting in your time to get a salary, and people do it again for security, right? They do it because of their retirement plan. They want a pension. They want certain benefits. They want their vacation. So the employees, what happens is that they're looking for secure agreement. And I see it, I work in human resources, and a lot of times now when we are in the hiring process, what happens is that people come in and they're interested in the job, but they're also interested in the agreement with the employer. So what that means is that, they're interested, what is in the collective agreement? What am I going to get by working for you? Are you going to allow me to work from home? Am I going to have more vacation time? Am I going to have certain benefits? So it's not necessarily related to a job per se. People don't choose the job because they're super passionate about it. They choose it because there's a certain security attached to it. So that's what the employee category is all about, you know? Um, this is where, you get taxed the highest. You're trading your time for dollars. And, there are a lot of people who succeed, and there are a lot of people in the employee quadrant that actually do really well as well. They go up, they get promotions. But the only downside to that is that, the higher you go up the corporate ladder, the more you're getting taxed, right? The higher your salary, the more you're getting taxed. And as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, in the earned income side of things, is that the more money you make, the more liabilities you tend to have, because you get to a point where, like, well, I deserve a bigger house. Well, I deserve a second car. Or, I should have the latest furniture or whatever it is, right? I deserve to go on this massive trip with my family. So you end up having all these liabilities. So yes, you're you're getting more money, you're getting taxed more, but you're also paying for a lot more expenses. And chances are you're working more than your 9 to 5 as you go up the corporate ladder. So there are more responsibilities attached to that. So what happens is that, okay, you're getting more money, but your family's seeing a bit less of you. You end up in this rat race because you're like, well, I should be getting more money, but more money is going to the government. And where's my money actually going? So that's the rat race of being in the employee quadrant, is that you can never truly be rich because of the tax brackets that you end up in. Um, Self-employed, what happens here is that you can actually make a lot of money, right? A lot of doctors start private practices. They make a lot of money there, consultants, coaches. The problem with this quadrant is that you no longer have time. So you suddenly are working all the time. If you want to know if you own your business or your business owns you, leave for a month. See what happens. Are you still getting paid? Because a lot of small businesses can't leave for a month. They can't go on a vacation because what happens is that they no longer get any money. They don't get paid anymore. Their business shuts down because they are the system. And here, I'll give you guys an example. I had my family doctor. She retired now, but at the time I had her for so many years. And I went to her office once and it was her birthday. And she was like, "Do you know how old I am?" And, I didn't really know, but I was like, she's probably in her 70s. Like, you know, she's been there a while. And she's like, "I'm 83 years old." And I was like, "That's crazy." I was like, "You're 83." And I was like, "Wow, first of all, you look great for your age. But second of all, I'm like, why are you working at 83?" It becomes your life. Your business becomes your life. So if you're a small business owner, like they're not retiring at 65. Unless they have a system in place that can generate some income, they are the system. So they're going to keep working. And a lot of times in this case is that, their passion is involved. So they actually love what they're doing. But you got to be prepared to sort of put in the time. And it's your evenings, it's your weekends, and it's way past the age of 65, right? If you make it past that. So these are just struggles on the left side of the quadrant. You have no time, and there's a cap in terms of the income that you can make. Same thing if you fall sick, right? I've experienced that. I was lucky enough that I was in this quadrant when I fell sick because I had benefits, I had insurance. I had certain advantages being here where I didn't have to worry about, am I going to be able to pay rent? Am I going to be able to feed myself? While you're going through cancer treatments, you don't want to think about that stuff. If you're here, and I know people who have been here while they've been sick, and that's sad. When you're worried about if you can pay for your rent while you're going through chemotherapy, that's a whole different ball game. I was very grateful that I didn't have to worry about that. But that's the reality of a small business owner. If you don't have insurance, if you're the system, you need to be there. If you're not there, it doesn't work. So these are certain things to keep in mind. Um, you know, when it comes to systems, it's more on the right side of things. So I'll talk a bit about that next week. The biggest thing here with this quadrant is transitioning from the left side of the quadrant to the right side. Like I mentioned at the beginning, there is a certain shift that has to happen when you go from the left side to the right side. Even if you go from an employee to a small business owner or a big business owner to an investor, your entire being has to shift. There's a certain level of education that needs to take place, and it's extremely hard. I myself, like I said, I've been here all my life and I'm transitioning over to the business side of things. So now I'm almost a year into it, and there was a whole year of transformation. I had to unlearn everything that I had learned over the years to reprogram myself to understand things from a different lens. And that was extremely hard. Learning is hard to begin with, but unlearning and relearning is even harder. So for people who are looking to transition from one quadrant to another, you got to be prepared to do an internal transformation. You got to change those core beliefs. You got to put in the work in order to do that. If you're expecting to change overnight, chances are it's not going to work. It's deeper than that. If you want to truly be successful in another one of these quadrants, you need to put in the time. You need to truly give yourself the time to get to a point where you understand the mindset of the people who are in those quadrants. And the whole purpose of this is not to convince you again that one quadrant is better. It's to make you see that there are differences in all four of these, and to get you thinking about what it's like to go more on the wealthy side. If you're thinking of being wealthy, if you're looking for time freedom, if you're looking for financial freedom, chances are you're not going to find it on the left side of the quadrant. It's going to have to be on the right side. So you're going to develop different strategies to think like, well, what can I do to get on this side of the quadrant? You can't just jump ship because chances are you're going to fail. And what happens is that, like I said, each of these quadrants has risks. So if you're not prepared to go from an employee to a big business owner, chances are it's not going to work, and then you're going to give up and you're going to end up going back here, right? If you go straight to being an investor and you don't have the strategies or the knowledge, well, guess what? You've probably lost a lot of money through that. And you don't want to end up there. So you've got to mentally prepare yourself to change that quadrant. So before I let you guys go, I want to talk a bit about cash flow between all of these. So what typically happens is that people start here. Like I said, most people are in the employee category, right? A lot of times what happens is that they'll go straight to here. And I see this quite often working labor relations and human resources, like we have a lot of people that come in that have a law background. You know, they're interested in labor law, they're interested in jurisprudence and legislation. So they come in as a government employee, and within a few years after they've gotten the experience and the training, they're like, you know what? I'm gonna go work for myself. I'm gonna make a lot more money. So they go from here and they start their own law practice. And it's true, yeah, they do make a lot of money. But what happens? They end up working crazy hours. They're working weekends, they're working evenings, they're no longer seeing their families. And what happens is that oftentimes a few years later, they come back. They come back to the employee because they were like, well, the grass looks greener on the other side, but in fact, yeah, I have all this money, but I have no time. So they come back here. A lot of times also, people who are self-employed, they already have the knowledge of the struggles of what it's like to be a small business owner. They know that they are the system for their business. So they see this and they're like, I need to put a system in place. I need to put a system or people in place so that I can generate the passive income. Again, a huge learning curve going from here to here, because over here, you're doing everything yourself. Over here, you're delegating everything that you're doing to other people or a system to do it for you. So again, a huge transition, right? And then you have big business owners who come in and they're like, well, I'm very successful in business, so I'm going to be great in real estate. I'm going to be great at investing. And chances are, sometimes they're not. Why? Is because every quadrant is very different. But what makes a difference between this and this is the financial education. So on this side of the quadrant, you don't need any financial education. You can get by perfectly fine. And I've been very honest about this, is that I never had financial education. Up to the point that I decided to start my business, I couldn't even read my pay stub. I didn't need financial education. I was getting paid every 2 weeks. I put my trust in somebody else, in a compensation advisor, that I was getting the right pay. But over here, you've developed certain knowledge when it comes to big business. You've learned financial education, and you can use that skill set to put it in the investors category. And that's what I'm going to talk a bit more about next week, is how our self-development program really focuses on financial education. And network marketing actually falls under the big business category. And I'll explain that a bit more next week. But when you combine that with financial education, you can transfer that knowledge and put it in here. And now suddenly you're part of the two categories of the cash flow quadrant on the right side. So I hope that was helpful for you guys this week. And I look forward to part 2 next week, because that's when we're going to get into, how it all ties in together. If you have any questions, please put it in the comments. And, if any of you guys have already read the cash flow quadrant, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. So reach out to me, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Have a great rest of the week, and I'll talk to you guys soon.